Alright, so this project is about sterilization. So over this, we'll be covering what it is, how it's been used throughout history, how views on it have changed, and yeah, we'll just get right into it. Alright, so first off, what is sterilization? So sterilization is defined as a medical method of birth control that intentionally leaves a person unable to reproduce. So throughout history, there have been a ton of different ways that sterilization has been performed, but these three are the current accepted norms. So for males, it is a vasectomy, which is where the sperm-carrying tubes are cut. And then in females, we have tubal ligation, which is where a woman gets her tubes tied. And then there's also a method called a transluminal procedure, which is a chemical injection into the fallopian tubes, establishing them as kind of unusable, so their functions are stunted, therefore creating a method for sterilization. Throughout history, there's been many other types, such as castration, which is definitely just a lot harsher method of sterilization, which has gladly been put out of practice today, for the most part. All right, so these are just visualizations of what happens during sterilization. As you can see, the tubes have either been cut or tied, rendering them ineffective. All right, so how popular is sterilization? So around 700,000 female sterilizations are performed annually, and almost half of which are performed within 48 hours postpartum. So basically, right after having a child, they'll have their tubes cut immediately after giving birth. So approximately 500,000 vasectomies are performed annually on men for about 10 procedures per 1,000 men aged 25 to 49. So through this data, male sterilization procedures are far less invasive and serious, but they are less popular. Maybe because tubal ligation has been proven more effective versus vasectomies, and it's a more permanent option. So why are people being sterilized younger these days? So the new generation is typically called the millennial generation, and they're kind of choosing to go against the social norms. So the social norm is typically get married, have babies, and have as many kids as you want. But many people in this generation are opting to not get married and to not have children, and at very young ages.
All right, so how old are men who get vasectomies? The typical average age is 35 to 39, and that's about 32.1%. This chart just represents how much a vasectomy could cost in your state. The average cost for a tubal ligation is around $4,000, and then vasectomies are usually cheaper, around $2,500. And then as you see here in Indiana, vasectomies usually cost about $1.9 thousand. So how safe is it? There were reported 55 deaths in 2.5 years. 54 of those were tubal ligations, and 1 was a vasectomy. And this information was from a study conducted in 1984. The procedure typically has a very low risk for complications, but how effective is it? We found a quote in a book that says, "Neither female sterilization nor male sterilization is completely successful in preventing pregnancy. The failure rate, according to 10 major studies, is about 1%. And then is sterilization ever reversible? In some cases, vasectomies can be reversible, but not always. And then for women, sterilization is not reversible. So as far as eugenics go, how does that relate to sterilization? Eugenics is defined as the science of improving a human population by controlled breeding to increase the occurrence of desirable, heritable characteristics. And the idea of selective breeding was introduced by Darwin. Throughout history, people have been sterilized because of the eugenics movement and beliefs based on eugenics, and some past attempts based on eugenics, have been based on mentally, physically handicapped, race, alcohol addiction, family class, criminal history, etc.
So fun facts about sterilization. In 1907, Indiana was actually the first state to pass laws about involuntary sterilization, and within time, more states and more countries actually developed the laws too. The laws got passed because involuntary sterilization has been deemed brutal and a violation of basic human rights. So now that we know the groundwork for sterilization, it's important to take your opinion and see what you think. So these are just a chart saying like for sterilization and against it. So people can be for sterilization because the pro-choice movement, as Amanda said earlier, the millennials are deciding to not get married and not have children, but they're deciding this at a young age. It's also a common belief that permanent sterilization is no different than the conventional, as well as this is a good way to help the overpopulation. And in addition to that, it could be because a family doesn't have the financial support or necessarily the emotional support to have another child, so they do get sterilized. For against sterilization, doctors discourage it because, like we discussed earlier, most times it's not reversible. Many people believe that you need to be older and a bit wiser to make the decision about sterilization. And against sterilization, it causes less genetic variation. There are more options here on the screen, but another one is the moral thing. It's God's will if He gives us another child, so that's another reason a person could be against sterilization. So we read an article about sterilization, and this woman in her 20s, I believe she was 24, she wanted to be sterilized, and she had made the decision for years. But everywhere she went, she was turned down, and eventually she just got frustrated because she was paying for all these consultations and going and getting her hopes up. But finally, she found a doctor that thought she would be a good candidate for sterilization. And actually, later in the article, discussed a woman that had children, had stepchildren, and she wanted to get sterilized. And the doctor actually recommended sterilization. And so it's just, you can just see the difference from not even letting the surgery happen and encouraging it to your patients.
Okay, so how could sterilization lead to less genetic variation? In our scientific findings, we found that by decreasing the number of people that are producing offsprings with each other, there's less genetic variation among humans. For example, if only white people with no disease reproduced, the human race would lose much of its genetic variation. When there is a lack of genetic variances, organisms actually become more susceptible to diseases. And then with less genetic diversity, it is much harder for a population to respond to their environment and to survive in it. This has been demonstrated in current medical advances with genetically modified babies. So while people are being sterilized and taking away from the gene pool, there are also people who are reproducing babies that have been scientifically engineered to possess various traits by changing their genetic makeup of fetuses, so hence changing the DNA. And then with the religious aspect of this, what does the Bible say about sterilization? Some people argue that it's wrong to be sterilized because it's taking away God's possible will for certain people to reproduce. In Genesis it says, "And God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it.'" This was one of God's commandments to every continuing generation. So this takes control away from the Lord. In Proverbs it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." So if God wants us to reproduce, this also brings in another topic of debate when it comes to the conventional methods of birth control. With this, we also have to look at abortion versus sterilization. So this is a very controversial topic in today's society, along with the pro-choice movement with many millennials and how that they find it liberating. The Bible also says, "You shall not kill." So from a biblical standpoint, we must acknowledge that the use of any contraceptive is a much better option than abortion. When God commands us that we shall not kill, we must recognize that preventing life is significantly better than killing life that already exists. And so final thoughts, we have some pros and cons. So for the pros, it can be used as a typically safe form of contraceptive that leads to less abortions. It can be used as an alternative to traditional birth control in couples that already have children. In today's age, we also have to acknowledge that humans are becoming very overpopulated and we're using up resources very quickly. So it's the aspect of non-forced population control. And then cons, it's not 100% effective or reversible in every case. And then the more it's done, the less serious it's taken. So it could be done too much eventually in a theoretical stance. And then there are worries that it could become reinforced as a law as the more it's reintroduced. And then from a biblical standpoint, God wants us to reproduce, and He wants to have the power over us and for us to not make our own decisions. And then there's less genetic variety among humans that can lead to serious health issues for future generations. And then these are our citations. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. We can just cut off the end.